Hello there, and welcome to Writing Essentials with Mrs. Benson, the Grammar Edition. For today's Grammar Edition video, we will be talking about pronouns. Let's get started. All right, I can talk about pronouns quite a bit, so I'm going to keep this as straightforward as possible for you guys because I think pronouns are such a very important piece of our basic parts of speech. And I hope you can understand and appreciate what they are, what we use them for, and just how important they are to the dynamics of our writing. Okay, so what is a pronoun? A pronoun is a word that is used in place of one or more nouns or pronouns. So it's really something quite logical if you think about the word pro. Pro means for, okay? So it's the root word for for. And it's the word, a pronoun is a word that I use for a noun. So instead of having a noun, I put a pronoun in. It's for the noun. So it's a substitute. All right. And we love using pronouns because pronouns allow for us to avoid being repetitive. I don't always have to use my nouns. I can use some substitutes so you hear some dynamics in my delivery. And sometimes the noun is a mystery. When I'm asking a question, I don't know what the answer is. So the noun is a mystery to me. So I need a pronoun as a placeholder for that mystery noun that I don't know yet. So I'll get more into that in a bit. So anyway, pronouns are words that we put in for nouns so we don't have to always use nouns over and over and over again. Okay. Now, when you're learning the word pronoun, you got to learn his buddy, which is the antecedent. The antecedent is the pronoun's BFF, okay? The antecedent, I'm really into Greek and Latin root words, so I have to say ante is the root word for before. So antecedents are usually the words that come before pronouns, and that's what the pronoun is standing in for. So it's what is the pronoun replacing, okay? So it's the word that a pronoun stands for or refers to. I put a sample here and I think that kind of spells it out pretty simply. Here's an example sentence. John felt that he had tried his best. In this sentence, the pronoun is the word he, right? But what is he a replacement for? I look to the left and I can see the antecedent, which is John. So every time I have a pronoun, I have an antecedent that it's replacing, okay? Now, there are 7 different types of pronouns, and I'm going to give you the technical terms for each of those types of pronouns, but more likely than not, you won't necessarily have to remember these very specific technical terms for the rest of your life, more likely than not. You might become an English teacher, and then it would be quite helpful. But really, it's more important that you just understand functionality wise all the different things that pronouns can do. So by giving you the titles of the different types, it helps me to explain those different functions. But I just want you to open your mind and increase your understanding to all the varied uses of pronouns, not necessarily so that you can memorize the list for a quiz, but so that you can just understand their use and therefore be a better writer because you know where and when to insert them and why you're doing it, right? So the most popular type of pronoun is the personal pronoun. And we like to divide personal pronouns into first person, second person, and third person. Personal pronouns basically refer to my speaker or the one being spoken about, okay? They're very, very widely popular and widely used in our writing and in our everyday speech, right? So the first person pronouns are I, me, our, we. It's, even though our and we clearly mean more than one person, I'm a part of that. So it's still first person. Second person pronouns are all directed at the you. So the second person is you, your, and yours. And then third person would be he, him, she, them, theirs. Those are all third person pronouns. Okay, so by far the most widely used, and the one I used in that example up there, right? John felt that he had tried his best. So he is a personal pronoun. It replaces those people that we typically use noun or proper nouns to talk about the people, but we want to change it up. We use a pronoun instead. Now, for another type of pronoun, this one you might not have thought of as being a pronoun, but it clearly is by definition, the indefinite pronoun. The indefinite pronoun refers to one or more persons, place, things, or ideas that may or may not be named. Indefinite really gives you the sense of what these types of pronouns are. They're not clearly, specifically defined, okay? So these are words like all, few, some, many, anyone, everyone, no one. These words have a sense of not being as specifically defined as their noun counterparts or as nouns can be, right? Instead of saying everyone, I could say the students. And then students is much more specific. Everyone is a little bit more indefinite. It's not as definite as students. It gives a little bit of interpretation there, and it's a replacement for students, right? So here are some examples. Everyone finished most of the book. Both of us went to the store. Several of the students missed the lunch activities. Okay, so those are some indefinite pronouns. Now, the next slide talks about intensive and reflexive pronouns. These look exactly the same, but they have different functions. So an intensive pronoun, like the title suggests, adds emphasis. So it emphasizes its antecedent, but it really has no grammatical function. It adds intensity, okay? One big clue for finding an intensive pronoun is that it ends in self or selves. So here's an example. I baked the cookies myself. I could just say I baked the cookies, right? So why do I need that myself? What does it do? Well, it doesn't do anything grammatically. I don't need it to have a complete sentence. But what it does do is it adds emphasis to the fact that I did it. I baked the cookies myself. John himself admitted he didn't study. So see how the intensive pronoun for our sort of writer's craft is something that adds a lot of, I think, kind of tone and personality. If I'm saying John himself admitted he didn't study, that has a little bit of a different tone, right? Than just saying John admitted he didn't study. I can have a little bit more spice if I use an intensive pronoun, which I like to know as a writer. Now, a reflexive pronoun is certainly not as not negligible, but as able to be removed from a sentence, right? In an intensive pronoun, I don't have to have it for the sentence to make sense. It just adds that tone and feeling and emphasis. For a reflexive pronoun, if I take it out, I'm not saying the same thing in the sentence, or the sentence feels incomplete. So this serves a very much more necessary function in the sentence. So it refers to the subject of a sentence and is typically a complement, which you can watch a video on complements to understand that more, but it serves the function of when the subject does something to himself, herself, themselves, okay? This pronoun also ends in self or self. So that's why I put them together on the same slide. They look exactly the same, but it holds a different function. This is when I'm performing an action upon myself, or someone else is performing an action upon himself. So look at these examples. I looked at myself in the mirror. Okay. If I took that myself out, I looked at in the mirror. What? What does that even mean? It doesn't make sense. I need them myself. I'm doing something, and it's an action where I need that reflective piece. I purposely used an example with mirrors because I want you to think of the idea of a reflection. When you're looking at your reflection in the mirror, you're looking at yourself, and that's what a reflexive pronoun is, right? We had confidence in ourselves. So this is an object of a preposition. I can't just have the in and nothing after it. I need the ourselves. So reflexive pronouns serve very necessary grammatical functions in sentences when we're performing actions upon ourselves, right? Okay, last types of pronouns, and then I promise we're through. And again, don't get overwhelmed by all these different types. Just be willing to hear and expand your understanding of, wow, a pronoun is a much more vast element of in a sentence, part of speech, than we might have thought at first glance, or upon first thinking of a pronoun. You might have thought, oh, I, it, he, I've got it. But all these words are pronouns too. Okay. These are pretty simple and they make sense when you think if a pronoun is for a noun. Interrogative pronouns are a very necessary thing because they introduce a question. And in a question, I'm using an interrogative pronoun as sort of the unknown marker for what hopefully my answer will be a very definite noun, right? So here's an example. Your interrogative pronouns are typically who, whom, whose, which, and what. So I put the example very simply, who are you? Okay. When you think about that, the who is a placeholder for the answer, right? So it's a pronoun. I'm hoping that the person will say, I am Mrs. Benson, I am John, I am Sam, I am Sally, whatever. So John, Sally, Mrs. Benson, those are the antecedents. Those are the nouns that who is replacing, okay? Now we have the relative pronoun. This is probably the most, dare I say, sophisticated type of pronoun, complex type of pronoun, because it's really, your understanding of it kind of hinges on you understanding the concept of clauses, which will have a video of its own. So if you're not really grasping clauses totally, that's okay. Just kind of wrap your mind around the idea of it. But a relative pronoun essentially introduces what's called a subordinate clause. And a subordinate clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb that can't stand alone. So it's attached to an independent clause. And so I can use relative pronouns to attach. It's kind of like the glue, the Scotch tape that attaches the dependent clause to the independent clause. And typically, this is kind of like an adjective function or a noun function in a sentence. And I'll kind of piece that out for you. The relative pronouns are that, which, who, whom, whose. I said those quickly, but they're there on the screen. It doesn't really matter that you memorize the list. It's just more about understanding what they do. And they describe, act as an adjective, nouns by giving me a subordinate clause. So here's an example. It is the pizza that my mom made. Notice how I'm describing the pizza by giving a dependent clause that my mom made. And the pronoun that is attaching it. Okay. He is the one who finished first. Who finished first is modifying one. So it's giving me more information about one and who is the glue that brings that in. Okay. Again, this is the hardest one. This is the most complex, higher level understanding of pronouns. So if you're not fully getting it, it's totally okay. And the more you learn about clauses and the parts of sentences, the more you'll understand it. The last type of type of pronoun that you could find in a sentence is the demonstrative pronoun. And when you think of the demonstrative pronoun, I like to think of a toddler with a pointer finger. And this is because demonstrative pronouns are used to point out a very specific person, place, thing, or idea. So noun. And the demonstrative pronouns are TH words, this, that, these, those. And the key with demonstrative pronouns is to consider the idea of a toddler who doesn't have a very vast vocabulary. So a toddler may not know the word for cup. The toddler may not know the word for pen, but the toddler will learn very early on the word that. And then the toddler can point and say, I want that. And the toddler can point and say, I want that. And that is just one word, but it's now substituting a whole host of other vocabulary words that this toddler doesn't have. So when I use the pointer and I say, I want that, that is a substitute for a much more specific noun or pronoun, right? Instead of saying I want the cup, I'm saying I want that. So demonstrative pronouns, think of your toddler, think of replacing something that's much more specific and pointing it out. Pointing it out is a really key piece of demonstrative. Last thing I want to say before we close out this video, I can talk about pronouns for quite a while, but it's really just the idea that pronouns replace nouns. We're very grateful for having pronouns because our writing would sound really repetitive and choppy and cumbersome if we were stuck in a world with only nouns. So pronouns serve a super important function for our sentence variety and dynamics and the fluency of our writing. And at the end of the day, I think you're going to nail it. I think you're going to understand them more and more. And by watching this video, hopefully you're on your way. The last thing I want to point out is that you want to be careful. Sometimes what looks like a pronoun is buddied up with another noun. And in that case, our pronouns acting as an adjective. Here's an example. If I said, I want that cup, now I've told you it's a cup. So that isn't replacing cup, it's modifying cup. So now that has become an adjective. So just an extra little tidbit. I'll talk about that more when we discuss adjectives, but just something to point out that you really have to make sure it's replacing the noun, it's not helping the noun, because there's a difference. Take care, and I'll see you next time.